Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Paul Stevens, editor of Short-Term Rentals, and welcome to this Rockstars 4.0 webinar on digital trust and safety, combating the evolving complexities of travel payment fraud, sponsored by Flywire. This is me, Paul Stevens, editor of Short-Term Rentals. And in terms of webinar guidelines for today, please keep your sound on mute and your camera off if you're not speaking. I'm being ably assisted by my colleagues Justin and Joe today, and all details will be in the chat, so please do post any questions you have there as well throughout. A recording will be sent round to everyone after the session today. And now check out this short video from our Rockstars series sponsor, Flywire.
Nemo Bay is a wilderness resort remotely located in the southern part of the Great Bear Rainforest, which is just off the northern tip of Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And people that come to Nemo Bay are usually looking for adventure, for wilderness, for wildlife. Oftentimes guests leave in tears just feeling so moved by the place. What really appealed to us about Flywire originally was just their ease in payments for credit cards, because at the time our credit card payment was not easy by any stretch. People would have to go to the bank to do a bank wire transfer, or they'd have to call us with their credit card information. We'd have to write it down. There's a lot of room for error, and if someone had a trouble with a bank wire, we'd have to try to resolve it on our own. If not, we'd have to call the bank. It was just very complicated. There was nothing easy about our payment system. One of the great things about Flywire is it will automatically convert into their currency if they wish. And they have the option of paying by credit card or by wire transfer. And it's just a click right from their living room, right from their computer, right from their phone. So it's just made the payment process so much simpler and easier for them. I've been totally blown away with how much it really transformed our payment system for both our side of things as well as our guest side of things. Within our work week, we save about 25% of our time not having to worry about payments. It really allows us to focus on our customer care and really giving us the space and time to really focus on our guest experience. I can't say enough good things about Flywire and how it's transformed our business. We've saved money with Flywire, and just working with the Flywire team has been an absolute delight.
So thank you to Flywire for that video. So let me introduce our Rockstars lineup for today, and we're going to start with Colin from Flywire. So Colin, take it away.
Hi everyone, thanks so much. Colin Smyth, Vice President and General Manager of the travel vertical here at Flywire. As you saw, we're focused on international payments and travel payments. I actually just really want to go to Nemo Bay, but really excited to spend some time here today discussing some really important topics. Thank you again, Paul, for the opportunity.
Pleasure. Thank you, Colin. And next up we have Mark from Globe Apartments.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm the MD of Globe Apartments. We're a service apartment operator in central London. The business has been getting on for 40 years now, so it's a well-known boutique operator.
Thank you very much, Mark. And next up we have Cynthia from Dtravel. Cynthia.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining. I'm Cynthia and I'm the head of growth at Dtravel. We're essentially the world's first decentralized home sharing platform that gives all of its users an ownership share in the platform. So definitely really excited to be talking about all things payments today.
Thank you, Cynthia. Pleasure to have you on. And last but no means least, we have Will.
Hi, Will Plummer, CEO and co-founder of Trust My Travel, and we provide a financially protected payment solution. So we support travel companies in not just taking payments, but also protecting their consumers from their own insolvency. So I'm giving a little value add, and obviously it's very important now with the onset of COVID. And we're talking about trust, which is my favorite topic. So looking forward to getting stuck into that.
Thank you, Will. So for context for today's discussion, we're going to be referring to Flywire's Global Consumer Survey that came out this year on how consumer travel plans signal a tourism boom. We'll also be talking about Dtravel's launch earlier this year, integrating with Dtravel.com Colin and Cynthia will be able to touch on those. On short-term rentals over the last couple of months, we've also been writing about the rise of so-called neobanks, such as Revolut. They're launching its Stays app earlier this year. We'll also be delving into some of the holiday rental frauds in Europe and what tourism bodies such as IPRAC are doing to increase consumer confidence when booking. So let's get started with today's discussion. And Colin, I'm going to start with you first. So as a global payments enablement and software company, and that could be a little bit wordy at some point, but there's a lot to dissect there. So you say, your website says that you're trusted by organizations around the world to deliver on customers' most important moments. What sort of fraud techniques do you cover against with Flywire?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it starts with as you look at traditional travel payments were probably done through static PDFs, and whether PCI compliance was available during that transaction may not want to know. And I think to me that's where one of the biggest things that Flywire's kind of stepped into, especially during COVID. And so we look at it from the beginning of the transaction through in terms of we have a full-fledged compliance department, so we have a transaction monitoring system. We want to make sure that since Flywire is unique in the sense that we're signing up the receiver of the funds. And so it's really important to us that if the funds are going to flow through the Flywire rails and system, that all funds that are moving through the rails are safe and above board. So transaction monitoring at point of kind of the transaction, in addition to helping and offering a secure payment method. So therefore being PCI compliant and all the different levels that comes with that. I think that's the most important piece to us, is the ability to make sure that when a transaction occurs, an important transaction for a holiday or a trip or a long-term stay, that you have that safety of knowing that all things that are put over across are going to be secure and safe, and not just, hey, so here's a static PDF, give me your credit card information in an email and hope that I then charge that card. And who knows who else gets access to that, sees that type of information. So I think for us, it starts twofold. One, on the PCI level of just the safety and compliance that offers, in addition, and then the monitoring of every transaction to make sure that that the client of ours or the company, the travel business, doesn't have to worry about fraud occurring within their system.
Of course. And of course, you're well placed really for this discussion. I believe, from the research that we've done, that you've processed, I think it's over $16 billion in total payments volume for more than 1,000 clients. So how do you see software now driving value and payments from now on?
Well, I think it's a fascinating conversation to have in a variety of different ways. But I think when you look at just security in general, it's the ability to have software make smarter decisions and not have to have, when you think about, old legacy systems where people were having to do a lot of manual checks, and the time that comes with that, then the frustration that sits with the client to say, hey, so why is my payment stuck in a queue, or why can't I get paid faster? Enabling that software, enabling that kind of AI to come in and allow those decisions to be made much quicker. In addition, I think overall what you see as a general trend in software and payments is this combination of the two things. So the consumer or the payer doesn't want to see the difference between a booking and a payment. They want to have it all sit in one system. And you see this across other, parts of, different industries in general. And I think it's starting to happen into travel, where it should just be one experience from beginning to end. And security has to be a major part of that, because if the person, to your favorite word, Will, doesn't trust the experience, therefore they won't want to be part of this, and they won't feel good about their booking their holiday or booking their trip. And that's a core piece to this, I think. And so we see that as software is only going to create more efficiency, whether that be on transaction monitoring, on security, or the ability for the travel business themselves to offer a better experience to their guests and create a more simplified payment experience and booking experience.
And yeah, I believe that word trust that you and Will have already mentioned is going to come up quite a lot in this thread today. So we'll turn to Cynthia next, because Dtravel is probably the newest company of the four that we're looking at today. So could you just talk us about what are the actual benefits of using a cryptocurrency platform when it comes to combating digital fraud?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that Colin said, which I really like, is the idea of automating a lot of processes through software and making it a better user experience, both for the provider and for the end user. And I think that's one of the benefits of using crypto payments or digital payments in general, is that because the payment, you have to sign your wallet when you send the payment, you're essentially guaranteeing that it's your funds. And so a lot of the traditional issues with payment methods like chargebacks and fraudulent payments, because it's a stolen or lost card, they don't really tend to come up with crypto. And then the other benefit too is that when you use crypto, when you have to buy crypto on an exchange, generally you have to go through what's called a KYC or know your customer process. And that's something that's used in traditional finance and banking, because banks have requirements and obligations that they have to know who their customers are, and they have to do checks and balances to make sure that they're not laundering money and that the funds are from legitimate sources. And so because crypto users are used to that kind of experience, with a travel platform like Dtravel, we can actually build the KYC in so that we can verify who our users are and make sure that they are using guaranteed funds from their wallets. We've done background checks. And so for all parties, whether it's a guest on the platform or whether it's for us, we do those checks up front, and then we can guarantee that everybody is an honest and good actor on the platform.
Thank you. And how could you just explain for us how this is actually different from the traditional payment space for those of us who aren't so up to date with cryptocurrency, blockchain, etc.?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely a really interesting space to be in right now. Obviously, I'm biased. I love it. But with crypto payments in particular, what happens is that unlike, say, a bank account that you have, you manage your own funds. And so you have what's called a digital wallet, which stores all of your cryptocurrency. And there's two pieces to it. There's a public key and a private key. So your public key is basically your address that everybody can see. And then your private key is what you use to sign it. And so that basically acts as a way for you to verify that the account is yours. And so, it's basically impossible to actually hack into a private key. Like, you would have to have it by stealing someone's private key or tricking them into giving it to you. So unlike traditional banks or banking systems where it is vulnerable to hacks, you don't have that issue in cryptocurrency. So it's a lot more secure. And so on the payment side, when someone does send a payment, because it's, they are signing it with their private key, that the funds are from them. And so again, where in the traditional payment space, somebody might steal a card, which happens all the time, that doesn't really happen in crypto, because that the funds are from the person who signed it.
Thank you, Cynthia. We'll turn to Will next. At Trust My Travel, Will, what are the sort of common techniques that you're noticing of rental fraud, whether it's in the holiday or business short-term rental market at the moment?
Yeah, so I think sort of there's kind of two things. There's the standard things that Colin and Cynthia are talking about in terms of the actual consumer and making sure you're offering them, legitimate means to take payment, capture that payment information. But I know Chris, who was supposed to be here, talks a lot about the flip side, which is actually the supplier-led fraud. And it's both sides of the coin. How you can protect the consumer from the false advertisers, the false websites. It's so easy these days for anyone to spin up a website. It's at times, depending on where you are, easy to get a merchant account for some of these things. But some of the things that I know Flywire do, for instance, and what we do, it's validating everything within that process. So we're onboarding that travel merchant, that STR operator. We're actually checking out they do what they say they're doing, through the likes of IPRAC accreditation, through checking the business, doing KYB checks, KYC checks on the actual business, so that when we're taking a payment from a consumer, we can say with all certainty that if you book, that is what it says it is, but also if anything goes wrong, there is that protection in place. And that's where something like Trust My Travel comes in, because either the funds sit in trust and escrow until travel has happened, or they're insured against the failure of that provider. So when we're looking at payments, when we're looking at trust, and when we're looking at that whole sort of digital ecosystem, you need to consider, you know, both sides of it. It's, you know, from a consumer perspective, validating the actual provider of that, and then from provider's perspective, actually covering off the fraud, the PCI, the security of the card, whether the card has been stolen. So it's a battle for both sides, but there are a lot of solutions out there, and it is about being diligent and putting plans in place to cover that off. And if you get it right, you know, as a business, you can really expand your offering, gain credibility in the market. And that's ultimately what people want to do. And certainly legitimate operators want to expand, you know, what they're getting, especially at this time.
And you mentioned how easy it is to spin up a website, and the issue of trust has already come up several times in this conversation. Yep. So with your own,
we love that word.
with your own business, how are you actually working actively to enhance trust and consumer confidence? I know you work closely with iPrac, you said, on the verification side.
Yeah, so in the short-term rental market, you've got companies like iPrac who are actually, you know, checking that a property exists. I know Chris's story is very much around consumers who unfortunately had a bad experience. They turned up in the south of France, booked a very expensive villa to only find that the villa didn't exist. And that's not uncommon in whether it be the STR market, whether it be the broader travel market. You know, flight agents are a classic example where it's very easy to get a website with, you know, search functionality to check out flights, take payment, and then for that company to disappear. So we're about very much checking the validity of the company, checking what they're selling, how they're selling. So we will explore their website, we'll explore, you know, who's behind the business, where the money's going. And we have different levels of protection within our own solution. So we can either completely restrict the flow of money until travel has happened, or we can insure against it based on, you know, startup company, how money sits and where the risk is. But ultimately what we do is protect the customer. So in the event of that insolvency, you know, God forbid, the consumer is 100% protected and they know that they can get their money back. And I think very much sort of post or during COVID, that's what people are going to be looking for as they get back into travel. You know, that the health side is one side of things, but unfortunately people were, you know, burnt. You only have to read about sort of the refund crisis to see, you know, people are a little bit suspect about who they book with. So you want to know that it's a valid company, and you want to know where your money is and how you get it back, and if you have a right to get it back. And I think these are all sort of considerations at the moment.
Thank you, Will. And finally, we turn to Mark, because you're a service department and letting agent based predominantly in London. So what sort of, you've perhaps got a unique perspective in this sense. What sort of fraud techniques are you seeing right now across the market being used?
Well, the area that I feel most interested in and the most passionate about, I think I'd call it more a business practice than a technique, and it's really a business practice that puts agents and operators at risk of bad debt, which is very different to what the others were saying, which are very, very interesting. Obviously, the idea of secure payments, but my perspective is, where does that payment end up and who with? And it's what they do with that money that is the risk that I think service department operators face. So what am I really talking about is, yeah, what do they do with the money? And where this industry is at risk because it's not regulated, some operators, agents, could be more agents, I would say, could be lured into the age-old practice of teaming and lading, robbing Peter to pay Paul. So when this occurs, and I'll just explain it, because it's not a high-tech activity, it's a very old school method. So when this occurs, the rent is paid by others to an agent, let's say, and he uses it as his working capital. So probably he starts paying rents for other people that haven't come in yet, and he's trying to control the money, but using one person's money for another transaction. And maybe that can work in an unregulated setting. But when things start to falter and the agent starts to use it to pay his bills and pays his office expenses, it's really a downward spiral, because eventually, and if the money cash flow stops, the business stops. And as an operator, we get excuses, and then eventually, well, not soon after, the business ceases trading. So that's really where I'm coming to this is actually what's done with the money once it's paid securely to an agent.
Sure. And we're going to touch on some case studies in a minute, but would you say that this is something that's become more prevalent since COVID, since the start of the pandemic?
I think there's been some business failures. I think the apartment side, because it's not regulated, is always going to be prone to this. Technology, I think, will reduce the number of smaller operators, smaller agents, which probably does stamp out a lot of the really cheeky way that people sort of procure money. So I think it is better in the quantity, but I think the size of the operators means that failures will be bigger and could be enormous.
Have you got any in mind that you wanted to refer to?
Well, I mean, if I look at my own sort of case study, the last bad debt that we had was a cracker. I mean, that was the collapse of Bridge Street. I mean, my experience with them as an operator is that they were booking flats right up to the end of, we stopped actually dealing with them a few months before they ceased trading because we couldn't get paid. But they were trying to book flats with us, and they had no ability or intention of paying for them. So that was that's my own personal experience of how a big operator can go right from under your nose, and they were a very well established firm.
Absolutely, and that's something that we've covered before on Service Department News. I'm going to on one of our other websites, International Hospitality Media. Cynthia, I know you had a particular case study you wanted to refer to that you've been doing with Dtravel in the last month.
Yeah, so Dtravel is one of our really close partners that we work with. We're obviously going to be doing some partnerships there on the travel side and being a supply for them for short-term rentals. But what we've seen that's really interesting is that crypto payments and even just crypto demand with Dtravel has increased crazily in the last year. So they have seen an increase of over 600% year over year compared to this time last year, which, given that there's been a pandemic for the last 18 months is really incredible. And I think what's really interesting is that they see 75% of their payments being in crypto. So I think that really speaks to this shift that we're seeing in consumer desires for different and alternative payment methods. And obviously crypto is kind of having a moment. Everybody's really into the NFTs right now. You see a lot of influencers, artists, musicians who are talking about the NFT space. And where a couple of years ago, I was sort of like the shifty person in the room with like, oh, that person works in crypto. Now people are calling me up and saying, hey, Cynthia, I really want to learn about crypto. Can you give me some advice? And so it's just been really interesting to see this cultural phenomenon shift. But I think that because of this, you see a lot of millennials and Gen Z in particular really resonating with the crypto payments because they have control over it. It's something that they understand. There's definitely a mistrust that I think we've seen from, first the recession and then now COVID of centralized entities and just people want something different. And I think crypto seems to be that answer for them. And there's a whole host of other benefits that comes with that. But I think it does speak a lot to this shift that we're seeing in people wanting alternative solutions on the payment side.
Yeah, maybe why do you think there has been such an influx in users? Is it just in the millennial demographic, which I guess I fit into? I know that these words like NFTs, acronyms, things that I've probably only heard in the last couple of months within social media, but now you see it everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, crypto, obviously has been around since Bitcoin in 2008. And I have to give a nod to all the developers and people working in the industry, because since I've been working in it in the last 3 years, I've seen such an explosion in the tooling and the infrastructure that we've built. And so it's just a lot easier to use crypto now than it's ever been before. And that's just going to improve even more. So in 2017, it was really hard to find a wallet. It was really hard to use a wallet. And now you have apps where it makes it really easy. It's just like any other payment method, essentially. And because the user experience is so much better than it was, you have people who maybe before were a little bit hesitant, who now, because the user experience is so easy, they want to try it out, and because it's becoming more normalized, people are more open to that. And because there's this benefit of potentially rewards back, or again, controlling your own funds and being able to use that currency wherever you travel, there's a lot of benefits over traditional payment methods that I think people really resonate with.
And it relates, I guess, to Will, because you said that you offer quite a diverse portfolio, whether it's short-term rentals, it's tour operators, etc. What was your principal reason for launching Trust My Travel in the first place?
So, I mean, we've been going for over 10 years now, and it was very much around, there are within Europe the package travel regulations. So there's a legal requirement for any travel company putting together a package to financially protect their consumer. So we were very much taken by that. We felt there was no easy solution. You know, most people have probably heard, certainly in the UK, of Atoll and ABTA, but these things come at a cost, and certainly it was very hard for people to get into that initially. So that's how the whole business started. And then, you know, we've grown it out of there. We have people all over the world who, you know, want to take advantage of, you know, actually improving consumer confidence in their products, in their brands, and you know, having a reason to buy. You know, doing that sort of cross-border purchase from a company in South America, for instance, that they found on the internet. How do they trust that company? How can they know that their money is safe? And actually, just listening to Mark before, you know, the last really big crash in the UK was of course Thomas Cook, the original Thomas Cook, and some of the practices that subsequently we found out that they employed. And I think looking forwards and moving forwards, consumers are going to demand more around that financial protection, that security of their money, and you know, the right practices need to be put in place. We believe it's based around a trust account. Yeah, we back that up with insurance, so that helps with the cash flow, but fully, you know, transparent for the consumer as to where their funds sit, their rights to it, and also their security around that. And one of the things we've spent the last year doing is actually putting a consumer-facing brand out, trustprotects.me, which means that consumers can look up their booking. They can see that it's financially protected. They're not just relying on a badge on a website, and getting them engaged in the actual transaction. So probably to Cynthia's point around the sort of blockchain and crypto, which I confess I'm not Generation Z, and I don't really understand, but I do get to the blockchain. But by getting the consumer involved in that transaction, so we from a Trust My Travel perspective form a tri-party agreement between the travel company, the traveler, and ourselves. But we want the consumer to engage and say, yes, I did make $1,000 purchase with this travel company. Yes, it's for this date. Yes, we know it's protected with the funds sat in escrow, with the funds being insured. Actually, it's to that point around the sort of blockchain idea that there are those checks and balances that are done on both sides, where previously there's been blind trust, I suggest. And while I don't think Mark would ever use the word Ponzi scheme, I think there have been some, there might be a suggestion that there have been some bad practices in the industry at times on that basis. And I think moving forwards with the technologies, people want more, and travel companies should be offering more.
I don't know if Mark or Cynthia wanted to come in there, but no, that's okay.
Yeah, sorry. Actually, I think just to Will's point, I love how he's like bringing in the blockchain. I think you sound like an expert already, Will. If you're really good at making it seem like you know what you're talking about. So I think something that Will talks about, which I think is really important, and we're seeing an increase in this, is that desire for transparency. And I think it's great what Will's company is doing to really offer that for consumers. And that's what blockchain does, because everything essentially is recorded on what we call a distributed ledger, meaning one party doesn't have control. It's shared by everybody and everybody keeps a record, but it's public. And so anybody could go on and see, okay, there's these funds in this account that's being held by this travel company. You have this much in insurance protecting this company. That's really the transparency that we want to bring to the travel industry. And I think, to Will's point, consumers are going to demand that more and more as time goes on. And so as travel operators and as a travel industry, how do we meet that demand in a way that is easy for consumers to use and engage with?
Thank you. It leads me on to Colin. Was there a particular maybe recent case study that you've seen at Flywire talking about these points that you wanted to pinpoint?
I think if you look at the video of Nemo Bay is a great example of where and how this can operate in terms of, and I think I think one of the major themes that is coming out of COVID is this idea that the consumer has more power now and should have more leverage than ever in terms of, and you kind of think about that from a transparency standpoint, from a refund, from a chargeback standpoint, all those things. And I think when you start to look at that and what will come out of that, I think that's all the benefit for the discussion we're having today. And if you look at Nemo Bay as an example, they were using kind of a bunch of different legacy systems and wanted to find ways to not only make sure that all their payments were coming in securely, but they could also track those and use software to kind of manage those payments. And they look at a variety of different ways in which they get paid. So they obviously have credit cards, they have wires, they work with some alternative payment methods. And that's where kind of Flywire came in and was able to help them. And in addition, previously they were using kind of, shall we say, more of the static PDF model from a security standpoint that probably doesn't feel good for all of us here. And so that's kind of, I think, where we see a major theme too, is this idea of how are we making sure that everything that happens is happening transparently, and in the idea that how you get paid and where you get paid, and the consumer knowing the terms in which that, what happens if they can't get into the country, for example, right? Things we never thought we'd have to debate are now real life issues, and when borders open and when they don't open dramatically change in terms of how do you hold their funds, how do you offer them to make sure, do you rebook them for the following year, do you give them the money right back, like what does that conversation look like, how does that work? And I think Nemo Bay's done an amazing job of working through that, and we've helped them as we move forward on that as well.
I think an issue we haven't really explored too much so far is actually how businesses can effectively safeguard themselves. So, Will, from a business or consumer perspective, what do you think are the issues that are at stake, and maybe what advice would you give on either side of the argument?
On either side,
or whichever way you get it from.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think we've spoken a lot about it, and about everyone sort of coming to the party in terms of if you are entering into a contract to buy a holiday, what does that look like from both sides? So from a consumer perspective, you want to know that the holiday company, the actual holiday, exists. From a travel company's perspective, you want to know that consumer money is legitimate, they're not going to charge back, and they're entering into that. And outside of everything that we've kind of spoken about, whether it be financial security, whether it be the actual payment, I think it comes back to this whole point of transparency. And post-COVID, I feel very strongly on that. We've worked with the people that we work with around terms and conditions. I think historically they've always been about the small print. People have clicked, signed, whatever it may be, without necessarily reading them. Things like force majeure policies have proven not to be effective in charging chargebacks in COVID. I think it's time to sort of, stick the label up and say, this is what we do, this is where your money's at, this is your right to get it back. Because from both sides, to protect the travel companies, but also to protect the travelers, it's crucial that we put that out there so the travelers know where they stand. If you haven't got a right to a refund because it was a non-refundable deposit, say it, make it totally clear. If the money's being held securely in a trust account, say it clearly. And I just think everyone coming into that and bringing together kind of everything that everyone on this call is talking about is so important. And that's where the travel companies will really flourish post-COVID, because consumers are looking for that trust element. Yeah, I use the word, we're arrogant enough to use it in the title of the company, but it is about trust. And what is going to set you apart from your competitor? Why are they going to, at the end of the funnel process, give you their hard-earned money? Yeah, photos, nice website, might display a property, a holiday really well, but listen to Chris Morgan from iPrac talking, and he talks very much about having a trust page on your website. How do you convey to the consumer that you're the company they should part money to? And I think it comes down to that transparency, to making the terms and conditions very clear, the security around payments, the PCI, etc. I mean, that's kind of 101 in 2021. To Colin's point, what happened before, best not to ask sometimes, but really, if you're operating now, if you're taking payments in an e-commerce environment, you've got to be at that point. And then it's going that bit further, which perhaps might not have been accelerated without COVID, but is very much prevalent today. And it's how you're going to win a lot of business.
I should just remind everyone that you can pop any questions you've got in the chat or on the Q&A for any of our panelists. Hopefully we'll have time at the end to answer those, and all our panelists will be here to do that. So Colin, I'll come back to you on that. Hearing what Will said there, how would you say that hospitality businesses can effectively safeguard themselves when it comes to payments, and especially as we've seen already with your global consumer survey report, that people are actually spending more money now post-COVID?
Yeah, I think to me, it comes back to the transparency theme that we've all been talking about in terms of, are you updating your terms and conditions? How are you thinking about that? What are the ways in which the payer guest knows that, if they can't make the trip, that can not be, that can be easily refunded to them or extended to another trip, those types of things. I also think the solvency issue is a point to think about of, hey, will this business be available to us if we want to postpone in 2 years' time? And, working with them to show that is an important piece. And I also think, to me, the idea of just kind of working with the customer in the right way and the guest in the right way. A lot of the clients we work with, especially, have a lot of repeat business, which has been a benefit for them throughout COVID, is that they knew a lot of the people who were coming to them. And so therefore, they could extend the trip out to a following year or different ways to work through that. So to me, I think a lot of it comes down to the terms and conditions. How are you making sure that you're making it as flexible as possible for that guest, so that they know, depending on what's going on, from their safety, from their comfort, from their security, that they can move the trip as much as they want. I think that's one of the themes you're seeing, even if you look at airlines now, and types of things like that. It's a lot more open than it probably was 18 months ago. And I think that trend will only continue as consumers have more and more power over and leverage over the ability to change trips in a quicker fashion.
I think we were talking before as well about how the travel payment experience really matters more than ever now. Why do you say that in particular from the report?
Yeah, because I firmly believe that if you think about it, more and more people just expect a payment to be seamless. If you think about, how much is now done through a phone with regards to Uber, or think about that, where it's almost like the payment's the second thought, whereas it's the experience that's more important. And so what we see more and more is what guests, and especially Flywire international business, so you're kind of traveling to different locations all over the world, that ability to pay in their local currency, the desire to pay in a local currency, and potentially to pay in a different method than normally would happen. So, Cynthia, when you think about crypto and those types of things, or in addition to maybe Alipay, maybe Union Pay, maybe Boleto in Brazil, this standard, like, here's a credit card form, go fill it out, like, that's not going to let you succeed. And one of the themes that we're seeing as we're coming out of COVID, and we know that there's this amazing amount of pent up demand for travel, those types of aspects of why a person chooses a trip are really important. It may be that they're going to get more points on this credit card through this system, or that they have already set up a certain type of account from a payment perspective. All those things matter. They may want to just do a simple wire. And so for us, those are part of the conversations we have with our clients every day. And then to layer that into, how do you then use that payment as just part of the experience. It shouldn't be a broken piece that's like, okay, so you've booked your trip, you've already created an itinerary, you have all these different elements moving on. Great, now let us kind of pause all of that and send you a payment form. Like that shouldn't be where it breaks. It should just be all part of this experience. It just drives through. And then for the client, for the travel company, they should be able to securely track that and manage all of that in one system that allows for just more efficiency, so that the back office isn't having to deal with like 4 different systems that are bookings, payments, reservations, and whatever else is next. So that's where we see themes coming. I think that again is a positive of COVID, to Will's point, with regards to it's just a forcing function to make our clients and travel businesses all over the world have to update all the legacy systems that they were working with.
And Cynthia as well, Dtravel, what would you advise like the best ways to safeguard against any kind of fraud or damages from the work you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about trust a lot. I know it's Will's favorite word, but in the travel industry and definitely on the home sharing side, it is absolutely critical to everything we do, because if we don't have trust, then really we don't have a product, because part of the experience and part of the product is that trust. It's trust that you can have a good trip. It's trust that you can have a safe trip. It's trust that you will get paid as a host. So there's a lot of different layers of trust built into the entire experience. And so for us, what we're trying to do is build in that trust from day one, so that everybody on the platform has the peace of mind that everybody is there with good intent. So we do the KYC on both the host and the guest side. And, not only does that provide peace of mind for everybody, but I think it also, for anybody who might be a bad actor, when they come on and they see those friction points that they have to try and use the platform, it probably acts as a big deterrent. I mean, I think the reality is that if somebody wants to be a bad actor, you can never stop them, and that's true of any product. But putting up those friction points up front, so that really people who have good and high intent are using the platform, means that you hopefully mitigate a lot of that risk up front.
And I know you talked about the explosion of something called DAOs. Could you talk a little bit about that and just expand on what the incentives are for those so-called good actors, and what also happens to those who are perhaps more bad actors, shall we say? Yeah,
I mean, DAOs are like so exciting to me, but for anybody who's not as familiar with the space, it's this idea of it being a decentralized autonomous organization. And so it's this move away from what we call centralized organizations that are controlled by one or a group of people, and more towards what we call like a community-owned organization or model. And the idea is that everybody who is a user on the platform gets a say in the governance and how the platform is run. But then that means that when you set up your incentives, everybody is aligned, because everybody benefits from the growth of the platform. Everybody is then motivated to make sure that they are working towards growing that platform. And, Will talked a bit about automating through technology. And for anybody who's not familiar with DAOs, the idea is that you basically put software in the middle and then people around the edges. So you automate a lot of processes, and that's where the autonomous organization piece comes in, because normally things that would have to be approved by people get approved by software, and then people on the edges are the ones who still run some of the things that need to be manually done. But because you build in a lot of automation, it makes things really efficient, and so you don't need as many people, running it, and everybody again is working towards growing the platform and growing the network so that everybody benefits. It's a really interesting shift, I think, away from what we're seeing for like platforms 1.0 is what I call it. And I think part of this, again, going back to that cultural movement, is you have people who are content creators on platforms like YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, and they have a lot of following, they have a lot of value that they're driving, but they don't actually get any of that value because the platforms keep it all, and there's no requirements for the platforms to actually give these content creators any of the earnings that they are entitled to or are really driving. And so what we've seen blockchain technology do is really enable this different type of organization, different type of platform to exist that really aligns the incentives of all users, so that it's a much more fair and equitable relationship between the two, and people who contribute to the network and the platform are the ones who are actually directly benefiting from it. So it's a pretty big shift, but definitely really exciting, I think, because the world is kind of moving towards this way of wanting to be more transparent, having more trust, and having more equity. And I think that blockchain really is enabling this shift to happen.
Thank you. And Mark, we'll turn to you because you've heard all of our other panelists talking about this. So are there any advice or tips you'd have to our audience listening in today about how we can be safeguarding our hospitality businesses?
I don't know that I've got any tips. I mean, what I think I can see, and I realize listening to this how a lot of the service department industry is really years behind in technology, because obviously the payments direct to the supplier is secure. The supplier is it's the buck stops with them. Where I've come from, my direction with my input today is really, it's about the indirect sources. You could be paying businesses with crypto in the most secure way, but it is actually where that money goes that is certainly in the department that I think it is opaque. We as operators are paying high commissions to source business, and those commissions can be quite opaque in how the networks are set up, who's feeding who, who's supplying who. So the trust element is actually enormous, and you don't know how many routes your money is going before it arrives. So I think I can clearly see that those are the areas that need to be fixed to prevent another Bridge Street, because they went bust for $90 million in the US. So that's a lot of suffering. They caused a lot of suffering to a lot of people, and their reputation they had a significant reputation leading up to that. So clearly there are lots of fixes to be had in the money process through these chains, and obviously technology is going to do it, and technology will probably kick out a lot of the baddies, because there will need to be transparency, and there isn't transparency at the moment. So I think technology is going to be the salvation for us as operators, that we know our money is secure, and the trust that we give our agents is founded.
And on that basis, Will, if we talk about like the worst case scenario, what happens if something goes wrong? What do you think? How can guests actually ensure that they are paying and booking through legitimate operators from now on?
It does come down to companies like iPrac, companies like Trust My Travel, companies like Flywire, who are actually checking the validity of the end supplier, the end provider. That's what you need. It's kind of that independent validation around that company, because if you get that, firstly, the product's going to be delivered, or there is protection in place should it not be delivered. And then certainly how we approach it is the customer is the most important part of all of this. I mean, it's their money. So if a provider fails, either the money is sat in an escrow account, a trust account, and they get the money back, or there is an insurance policy in place to do that. And by having independent validation around that, you're giving that security to the customer, and they know that they're going to get their money back. They can book with every confidence in the world. So I think it comes down to that, and it's not just about our service, but it's about, you've got to think how a consumer would think, and they want that reassurance now. To Mark's point, it's not just about. It's very easy for someone to provide a service, to get credit card facilities, to take the payment, but where's that money going? Who's checking that? Who's actually administering that? And unfortunately, and it's not been widespread, but it's been sizable enough. There've been bad practices in travel for a long time. And I think actually COVID has revealed a lot of that. And I think the industry needs to catch up and correct that. And now is an opportunity. And as I said before, I think we've all said before, the companies that sort of take that on will be the ones that benefit and come out the stronger for it.
And like you say, what do you think what is the future of payment solutions in your opinion, Will, for the industry? Is it wallets? Is it how do you see it from your perspective?
So I think, and again, I think I'm the wrong generation, but I don't really get crypto, and I don't get, and from that side of things, I get the technology. My view is until that's, taken on by governments, until it's an adopted sort of currency, it's very difficult for a consumer to understand. And again, Colin made a point earlier about currencies and adoption. Consumers want to pay in a currency that they know, they have, they understand the value of. They want to know what the value is if they're paying to someone else against their own exchange rate. So that's one side of things. We talk about digital wallets, alternative payment methods, etc. I mean, at the moment, in most places, credit card is still the driving force, and whether you're talking about an Apple Pay or Google Pay, it's still running on the scheme rails. I can't see short to medium term at the moment that changing, not least because the credit card schemes obviously don't want it to go. There are parts of the world, yes, you look at Southeast Asia, there are a lot of interesting products, digital wallets coming up. But in terms of the markets we're talking about, I think you're still largely talking about that, albeit wrapped in a different casing, be it whatever wallet. But it is about that security. It's exactly to Mark's point. The winners are ultimately the people that can prove the security of that money that they are taking. And by whatever means, whether it be cash, whether it be credit cards, Samsung Pay, Alipay, some crazy payment, some cryptocurrency, whatever it may be, it's around that ultimately it is where we stand as an industry and where I think that the winners will come from.
Well, shall we get Cynthia's perspective on that as well? How would you say that crypto payments are going to be a solution for the future, Cynthia? And are we going to see digital payments taking over permanently from credit or debit cards?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's an evolution, right? Just as with any new technology or new product or service, it's going to take time. And so obviously we do believe that crypto is the future and we're making a bet on that. But I think we are also cognizant of the fact that people have a lot of different variety of needs and how they want to pay. And so we will build that in. And again, speaking to kind of what we believe is the future, there's a company called blockchain.com and they make digital wallets. And just in the last year, from November to September, they have increased by over 20 million wallets, which is a huge amount in a short span of time. And just to give you some perspective, it took them 5 years from 2012 to 2017 to get to that same number. So I think there's definitely huge demand and a trend for this to be at least one payment option for people, because we really need to meet them where they want to pay and how they want to pay. And to Will's point, what we see in developing countries is that they actually leapfrog and skip over traditional banking systems. So a lot of these countries went directly to digital payments without having a bank account. They could text and send a payment even if they didn't have a bank account or a credit card. And it's not inconceivable that in the near future, some of these countries who are building out their financial systems could just go straight to crypto, especially because in a lot of countries that are less stable, people really like the idea of controlling their own funds without it being government controlled. So I think that there's definitely room and there's going to be a demand, especially as we see a lot of these younger generations really adopt and want these payment methods.
And I note, of course, that I think it's El Salvador, if I'm right, has just adopted Bitcoin as an official currency. So it's going to be very interesting to see the rate of adoption for cryptocurrency and digital payments in the future. I'll turn to Mark. Do you think there is actually this is there a catalyst for change really within the service department sector where which you're most familiar with?
Well, again, I mean, I think the Bridge Street, and it's a bit of a scandal. I mean, I think in a way, the way the service department industry brushed it under the carpet, I'm less sure. I mean, I know, I read a couple of press releases, I saw the figures, but I don't really think there was some great outcry from the service department industry about what had gone on. I think, and I was really surprised. I mean, you invited me here today because I've sort of drawn this, I'd sort of drawn this lack of engagement to well, not to your attention, you knew, but I was expressing it. So I think the problem is I've got a suspicion that the big operators in this sector see that bad debt from agent failure is sort of the cost of doing business, and I think it's kind of, it's built in, it's baked in. So I think the industry is gonna, I don't know, I don't readily see it. We're just a small operator, so I can't say that I'm consulted on this, but I've got that suspicion. So I suppose, where will change come from? And I think, when I hear Cynthia and Colin talk, I can see that it's probably going to come really from that consumer facing side, because that's where changes tend to come from. A few big scandals, a few big disasters in this sector, and we'll have to regulate. I think that's what will be the reason.
Yeah, we'll ask Colin what he thinks as well. Colin, what do you think are going to be the dominant maybe payment methods that we see from now on in the future, and how will it relate as well to the sort of changing customer preferences, that the evolving customer preferences we're going to see in travel?
Yeah, I think, I think it'll always evolve. I think, to Mark's point, the consumer will drive a lot of this, especially in the way in travel we work, which is consumer focused travel. I think there's a whole other element, kind of B2B payments within travel, and how much of that will stay over bank rails, in my opinion. But, I think that you will start to see more and more on the fringe in terms of, the other thing to me that's fascinating that we haven't even kind of discussed here is the buy now, pay later model, and where does that come into this whole debate, and how does that work, and how much of a threat is that to the card companies, and where does that look from the schemes? And I think that's kind of something that's very much like entering into the conversation. And you look at Afterpay with Square and those types of things, like you'd argue it's actually securely in the conversation now. And I think that's one of the trends to track too as we go through this is, how do people define credit? Where is that looked at? What are the benefits then from a buy now, pay later model to an operator who can get paid more quickly? And then could you offer some sort of payment plan quickly out to the guest? And what does that look like? So I think that's another theme here with regards to, but I go back to the idea that the consumer is going to control a lot of this because that's how they've been kind of allowed to. And I only think COVID will create that more and more. And so I think I also think people are going to, what will probably used to be just kind of like, yeah, we'll just throw it on the credit card, don't worry about it. They're going to really track more things now than in a way they ever have. And they're going to probably do a little bit more due diligence about the actual travel business itself. What are the payment terms? How easily is it and flexible is it for us to change the payment? I think all those things will start to happen in a way that hasn't. And I think buy now, pay later might be one of those ways that's a huge kind of elephant in the room, maybe entering the room, shall we say.
Colin, I know we're going to be doing a podcast in the not too distant future as well, so hopefully we can expand on that a little bit more. So thank you, a big thank you to all of our contributors, to Colin, to Cynthia, to Will and to Mark. We're going to be back next week for another Rockstars webinar, and that's going to be a session on Meet Property Managers, Will Urban Tourism Return? That's on Tuesday the 28th of September at 4 p.m. BST, and the details are in the chat for you now. And we're really looking forward to our inaugural in-person Urban Living Festival that's taking place live in London at Tobacco Dock on the 26th to the 27th of October 2021. You can check out more information on our exhibitors, our sponsors, our partners at urbanlivingfestival.com, and we're really grateful for everyone's support. For sponsorship opportunities, please do get in touch with my colleague Katie. Her details are on screen for you now. And of course, a big thank you again to Flywire for sponsoring not only this session, but our Rockstars series. Feel free, everyone, to contact us via our various channels. They're on screen for you now. So all that's left for me to say is to thank you again for listening, and to all of our speakers, and we'll see you all again very soon. Thank you.